For thy holy word, being a witness. 861, sing it up now if you can. Set my soul afire, Lord, for thy holy word. Burn it deep within me, let your voice be heard. Millions grope in darkness in this day and hour. I will be your witness. Fill me with thy power. Set my soul afire, Lord. Set my soul afire. Make my life a witness. Grope in darkness, waiting for thy word. Set my soul afire, Lord. Set my soul afire. Sing the last now. Set my soul afire, Lord, in my daily life. Far too long I've wandered in this day of strife. Nothing else will matter but to live for thee, and I will be your witness as you live in me. Set my soul afire, Lord, set my soul afire. Make my life a witness of thy saving power. Billions grope in darkness, waiting for thy word. Set my soul afire, Lord.
All right, ushers, if you make your way forward, let's go ahead and prepare to give to our Lord tonight. And let's turn our hearts to the Lord in prayer. Brother Gavino, would you pray for this offering, my brother?
Dear Heavenly Father, we just come to you tonight, Father God, humbled by what you do in other countries, Father God. We thank you for your greatness. Thank you for the missionaries that represent us throughout this world. Father God, we just ask that you would just please put a word on our hearts to do more for you, Father God, and to give more. And we thank you for this time. We can worship with our tithes and offerings. In Jesus' precious holy name.
Amen. Thank you. You may be seated. All right, well, it's good to have Brother Sowell here tonight, and his ministry has been a great encouragement to this ministry. In fact, he was the first church that came in and helped us knock doors when we started this church 19 years ago and brought a couple of busloads of people down, and we just blitzed Findlay, Ohio with people from Hope Baptist Church. And so he's now into retirement/evangelism and encouragement to pastors and missions conferences and staying busy. And I do appreciate his friendship, and he'll be preaching all week for the missions conference. And so, preacher, if you want to come up tonight and preach and teach as the Lord leads, God bless you for being here and being a friend and through the years. God bless you, brother. Thank you so much.
Amen. Thank you. It's good to be here tonight, and thank you for the invitation. I hope you appreciate what the Lord's given you here. Why, it's so easy to pass a church on every corner in any city and make an assumption that they're all what they're supposed to be. It's another thing to go in and spend some time and realize, wow, we've been blessed. So I hope you keep that in mind and pray that you will continue as the days move ahead. Ephesians chapter 5 is where I'm going to take it from tonight and I would love to say a little time. I'm going to do my best to do that. But the message is more important than the time. As a matter of fact, tonight the message is the time. And we'll talk about that. Thank you, Brother Mahaffey, for the work that you're doing halfway around the world. And we appreciate the fact that you're there representing us. And may I remind you, church, it's our duty to represent them in our part of the world as well. And so when we see slides and hear stories and we say, oh, wow, we ought to be able to tell them stories of what God's doing with us here so that they could say in turn, oh, wow. It's a partnership. And very often, if we're not careful, we falter at our end of the deal. Ephesians chapter 5, for the sake of time tonight, just to bring you up to date, we all are acquainted with the Ephesian church, I should say, because it plays a prominent role in the ministry of the Apostle Paul. We know Paul's entrance there and all the turmoil that revolved around his going there to preach. We know that folks got saved inevitably and eventually, and it becomes another success story in the long trail of the spread of the gospel around the world. I believe with all of my heart that the Great Commission was fulfilled early in that first century. I think the Apostle Paul said the gospel was preached in every city. I think it moved. You say, how does that happen? I don't know. But before you ask that question, let me ask you a question. How are we doing? With all of the opportunities that we have and all the technology that we have, we are faltering and failing. I heard someone the other day just driving down the road make a statement on the radio, and it shocked me. When I grew up, they used to always talk about how many people there were in the world and what a devastating thing it was going to be because of overcrowding. And there were 4 billion people in the world when I graduated from high school. That was the approximation. I heard the other day there's 7 now, and we're moving very quickly toward 8. Can you imagine what we're dealing with as far as the gospel is concerned? I see churches closing their door in almost every city. I hear stories of pastors just packing it up and saying it's not working anymore. I see Christians trying to find something that will combine all the fun and frivolity of life with the seriousness of the gospel and form something new where we can go to church and have fun. And I look at that and I wonder who's going to reach those 4 billion new people that have never heard the gospel. Well, it falls back on churches like this, and I'm glad to be with you these few days and thankful that you're here. I think that missions is the job of the church. I think missions is the concern of every believer, and we need to be that type of people. My text tonight is in Ephesians chapter 5, verse number 15. May I say before you get there, Paul has reminded them here in the first few verses of this chapter, as he has in much of this book, about where they came from. Sometimes it's easy to forget where we came from and what life was one time before we met Christ and what the life was we grew up with if we were not raised in a Christian home. And sometimes for teenagers, it's difficult who've been raised in a Christian home to realize that there's anything other than this. But may I remind you tonight, the vast majority of homes in the United States of America are not raised with any type of a Christian influence whatsoever. And so as he reminds the Ephesians where they came from to where God had brought them, he makes this statement, and that's the place I want us to spend just a bit of time tonight. Verse number 15, see then, in light of what he's already said, see then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. Brother Gary Bykirk has been in our church a number of times. I mean, he may have been down here before, Medal of Honor recipient, and he told the story of walking through the jungles of Vietnam and being a point man and leading his group through the jungles there. And he said, you never walked like this. He said, when you walked through the jungles in Vietnam as a point man, you walked like this. And went on to explain that idea of being circumspect. Looking around you, being aware of your surroundings, knowing what's going on here as well as here and back there and over there. And can I say to you tonight, many times we lose that circumspect look. in our Christian walk. We focus on me, my family, my kids, my church, my town maybe, and boy, but they got churches everywhere else and it's their job. We don't walk circumspect. We tend to fixate on, can I be honest tonight, the area that is the most troublesome in our life. If you're having trouble with your marriage, obviously you're focused on your spouse, and sometimes to the forgetfulness of everything else around you. And sometimes the church is no different than we are as individuals. We have a tendency to forget what's around the world simply because we're not there. We have a tendency to hear the missionary when he comes in, and boy, we had a great missionary from China tonight, and wow, that's great. Isn't it great what God's doing in China? We don't have to worry about that anymore. He's got it covered. One missionary or two missionaries among all those billions of people. And the truth of the matter is, we sometimes simply want to get enough of an encouragement to go home, put our head on our pillow and say, wow, I'm thankful I'm part of a church that's putting some money in the pan, and now let's rest easy and plan our vacation or whatever it is we got coming up next. Paul said to these people, you came from a background. Remember where you were. Remember what it was when the gospel came. Your reaction to it was adverse. Remember when somebody insulted your goddess, and you were offended by that. Remember when you sought to even take their life, and watch how God worked in your life. And then when you came to Christ, it was a growing process where God slowly but surely broke you away from a pagan culture and brought you not just to the knowledge that I'm saved, but the knowledge of what it means to be saved and the joy of living a Christian life and seeing your family. He said, you've completely changed in that aspect. He said, see then that you walk circumspectly, redeeming the time. I heard someone the other day talking about paying it forward. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but if you're interested in paying it forward, I'm sure at some point in the future you're going to owe me money. So just settle up with me before you leave tonight. Amen? I think that's a great way. I'll be honest with you. I don't know that we need to live our life paying it forward. I think we do need to live a life, though, that pays it back. Yeah. Walk circumspectly. Look around you. Remember where you came from, and realize for those of us tonight who have passed from death unto life, from darkness unto light, to whom much is given, much is required. And so the Apostle Paul put the thought in their mind, redeem the time. Right. Let me ask you a question tonight. What are you doing to redeem the time? I believe with all of my heart we're knocking on the door of the coming of the Lord. Yes. I would be remiss if I did not say 35, 40 years ago, preachers thought the same thing. But having said that, I think it's good for us always to live on the doorstep of eternity. Yes. Even if the Lord doesn't come back in the next 5 years, it would be in our best interest as Christians to live as though He were coming back in the next 5 years. Do you ever notice when time gets a little bit crunched and you've got to be somewhere, that the closer you come to being late, the more industrious you get, the more quickly you move, the more you say, I got to go, we ought to be that way when it comes to serving the Lord. If we're not careful as churches, we go to sleep. We've got a pew that's padded. We've got nice music, got a beautiful auditorium. We've got friends we can talk to before and after the services. And you know, if we're just feeling down, we can go out to eat with somebody. I'm going to go to China, become a missionary, and just go to eat with people. I feel the call. Amen. Actually, I feel the call 3 or 4 times a day. It must be what it is. We can get saturated with the convenience of ease in our life and lose touch with reality. I tell you, I'll guarantee you, this family has shed tears on the mission field. This family has feared for their lives on the mission field. This family has lost other friends and even converts that have gone away and walked no more with them. They have suffered loss. They have paid a price to be there. I would guarantee you that probably, and again, I can't read their mind, and we'll have other missionaries, so it'll be true of somebody this week, okay? I'll guarantee you they didn't get to the mission field more than a day. Till all at once the call of God was something you said, wait a minute. Brother Jack Woods told me years ago, he said, the strangest look I've ever seen on a missionary's face, and he put hundreds of missionaries on the mission field, was when they walk off that airplane, just arriving in the country, and breathe that breath and smell that air that is stale and putrid and not like it was in America. And to watch the look on their face and realize we're not in Kansas anymore, Dorothy. It's quite a transition. Our job as a church, our job as Christian people is to help get missionaries to the field. That's one of the ways we can redeem the time. But it's truthful. I've been in your services on Sunday morning. There are less people come to a missions conference than show up on a Sunday morning. Why? It's just not as important. I pastored for a long time. I know it's not just something here. It's everywhere. It's easy for me to walk in the door and plant myself in a chair on Sunday morning and kind of pay my dues, and then I don't have to. Don't bring me to those places where all you're going to do is ask for money. I'm not going to ask you for money. I'm going to ask you to redeem the time. Because the days are evil. My country, my culture has changed greatly in the last 30 years. I have 14 grandchildren, and I'll be honest with you, I fear for what kind of an America they're going to grow up in. Some of the things we talk about, we say, oh, that's horrible. What's going on in China? Listen, we're no more than a decade from that right here. You understand, it's necessary and needful for somebody to say, wait a minute, we've got to do something to redeem the time. You say, well, preacher, I know you're going to get up, you're going to talk about missionaries, you're going to get us all a little sad story, you're going to cry a tear or two, then you're going to pass the offering pan, and that's what a missions conference is all about. And I just don't need to come to stuff like that. And we get angry about our being involved in what God has determined is the means to reach the world. Boy, he said, go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. I say again, I think that the early church carried that out. Shame on us. With so many more assets than the early church had. With so many more people and such more comfort than they had, and yet we have failed miserably to get the gospel to every creature. But having said that, how do we go about this? What am I supposed to do? How does this go on? We get angry when somebody comes. I've had people, when I don't preach a lot of missions conferences, but I've had people come and say, you know, you're here this week just to get money. And I can tell you just love Jesus from their attitude. You know, it's just bond of fellowship just is instant there. It's like, boy, I'm glad you love me. I'm glad I came. Sometimes we rebel against anything that upsets our comfort, takes us out of our comfort zone. But he said here, hey, redeem the time because the days are evil. There needs to be something done to make today worthwhile 10 years from now. Redeem the time. Most of you couldn't remember what happened to you 2 weeks ago on a Tuesday. That'll tell you how much importance there is to the lives we live. It's a strange thing when disaster comes, how quickly we're drawn into focus. I'll bet everybody here tonight remembers where you were, if you were anywhere, on September the 11th, 2001. Never forget it. I had gone to the store to buy a gallon of milk for my daughters, who are married with children of their own now. But I had gone and I just came back in the door, and I remember my wife with a funny look on her face, and she said, an airplane's crashed into the World Trade Center. We did not know it was terrorist at that point. I sat down on the television, began to watch those flames, thinking, oh boy, I hope they get all those people out. And I was watching the moment that second airplane came in, to the chagrin of the reporter, and hit the tower. You understand, right there was a sobriety that came to America that was foreign to us on a daily basis. All at once, something brought us back to the reality of importance in the now. We always tend to focus on tomorrow, next week, sometime in the future, some arbitrary figure or place or date down the road. And as long as we're free to live in a lackadaisical manner today, it really doesn't matter what we promise the future. But boy, when a disaster comes, I can remember the thoughts clearly that went through my mind. I remember the things that took place in conjunction with it. I remember the American flags that seemed to be by the millions in just a day or two. You say, why? Sometimes things happen that cause us to say, wait a minute, this is important. And I submit to you, as horrible as 9/11 was to us as Americans, the fate of the heathen is far more important. There may not be a literal tower burning somewhere around the world, but I'll guarantee you by the time you wake up tomorrow morning, millions of people will have passed into eternity. They're passing every moment. Some of us watched as some of those people jumped from windows and hurtled to their death. What a horrible thing, but they did it because of the horror they left. And yet, isn't that the way the world is today? Somewhere along the way, somewhere in your town, are you listening? Somewhere in your town, there's someone tonight contemplating suicide. Someone, even as we're here right now, may have a gun contemplating, this is going to be better than the life I've had to live. No hope, no help. Find yourself in bed 2 o'clock in the morning, just about to hit that deep sleep, when it gets good. And all at once, there's a flash that comes through the window. And it's a red or a blue light. And then there's a siren that just breaks the stillness. And it rushes past your house, and you get up, grab your gun, and bang, bang. How dare that guy? Who does he think he is? Decent people sleep? No, you don't respond that way at all. As a matter of fact, if he stops within a few doors, you probably will grab your house shoes and put on some clothing if necessary, and you'll go to help to the best of your ability. Find out what's going on, to see what you can do to be a help to that individual. We don't look at people that respond that way, even though it troubles us and it irritates us and it wakes us up when we don't want to be awakened. But we say, well, but that's important. Sometimes we're driving down the road and traffic is heavy and it was heavy tonight coming this way. There must be something going on in Findlay or places south. But you're bumper to bumper, and all at once, cars begin to put on their brake lights. And you think, and then all at once, here comes a state highway patrolman or an ambulance down along the side of the road with sirens blasting and that annoying horn that they have. And right past us they go, and they bob in and out of traffic. And you don't roll down your window and say, I'm going to give you a piece of my mind. You don't worry about that. Because you recognize the seriousness of the situation. When seriousness comes, it brings sobriety. Yes. I submit to you, from our response to the mission field, we don't take it serious. Right. I've never yet heard someone, when a surgeon comes from the operating theater, just having cleaned himself, still in his gown with his mask pulled down around his neck and walking over to a family. I've never yet had a family jump up and say, you've been in there 12 hours, operate, what in the world? You make millions of dollars. I've never heard anybody complain about what a surgeon made when he looks at him and said, we've got it fixed. Yep. We've got it fixed. Yep. We are pleasant to those who inconvenience us as long as it produces something that makes us feel good. But we don't have that same attitude toward the things of God. I came to church tonight, we got another missionary. I know he's going to show pictures of starving people and animals and things, and then he's going to ask for money. There we go, same thing over and over. Yeah, I know, it's kind of like your doctor. He just makes money hand over fist, but you wait till you need him. You wait until it's you on the operating table and he pats you on the hand just before he puts you to sleep. And he said, I'm going to take good care of you. Somehow, when things are serious, they affect the way we live. And I'm not here to indict you tonight. I don't know you. But I know churches. I know the people I pastored. And I know that missions was a priority for the church that I pastored. And I'm thankful for that. But I realized that to the vast majority, even of my own people, missions was it's just prayer letters on the wall. And we just throw some money in the pan, and that's and they like to know at the end of the year, how much did we give? And I've often thought, do you want to know how much you gave, or do you want to know how much the church gave? Because that could be rather diverse and very offended for you. But somehow we just like to make sure we fulfilled our little slot, fulfilled our little obligation Paul said, that's not the way to look at it. Redeem the time. The days are evil. May I say, I think that if we were to cry that cry today, it would be, remember 9/11, when people died. Remember when things go on, when guys go into combat. Think about those situations. I've informed that when a cry comes over the airwaves in a combat zone where someone would call broken arrow, a broken arrow scenario means that we are inevitably going to be overrun. We cannot defend ourselves any longer. And at that point, at least in Vietnam, in the Vietnam era, any aircraft within closing distance, any soldier within proximity was ordered upon hearing that term, broken arrow, to immediately forget whatever else he was doing and get to that area to take care of those that were about to be completely overrun and destroyed. Soldiers didn't mind that they had to drop what they were doing. Helicopter pilots didn't mind that they had other things they needed to do. But upon hearing that, they immediately said, this is a priority. Where is missions on your priority list? Is it possible that we're going to have to wait until some missionary calls from China and says, my family's been arrested, or I've been arrested, my family's been taken away, and I don't know where they are. Some of the people attending our services have been shot and killed. Is it then we'll start to pray for them? How often is it, Lord, bless the missionaries all around the world. Got to be a gazillion of them. And Lord, I don't know all their names, but bless them all. Hope has the missionary letters all up and down the halls. And it was not unusual to come in on a Sunday afternoon or a Sunday evening or even during the week and seeing somebody stand there reading those prayer letters. And that was an encouragement to me as a pastor. But I thought, I wonder, that's not the way most of my people deal with this. I'm thankful for those that did, but to them it seemed like it was a little more important. I think what they were doing is redeeming the time. They were recognizing the seriousness, the gravity of the situation. And very much like the flashing red lights and the siren and the stillness of the darkness, they saw those prayer letters as something saying, hey, we need some help. And you felt challenged to say, let me read and see if there's something that I can do to be a help. Somewhere along the line, we need to take serious the idea of missions. And not just coming to a conference and shaking a missionary hand and looking at their slide presentation. And all of those things are wonderful. That's the way we convey the needs one to another. But taking it home and waking up in the morning and saying, Lord, help me today to redeem the time. If not here in Findlay where I live, maybe in China. Something needs to be done today that will determine somebody's destiny for all of eternity. If it was my child in the hospital, if it was my wife that was ill, I would take it far more seriously. And yet, we're under divine mandate to take the gospel to every creature. That command, that same one who commanded us to love our wives and to love our husbands and to love our children, encouraged us to pray one for another. And yet sometimes we don't take it as serious. You say, well, you know, how much money do you want? Let's not talk about money right now, all right? Let's talk about your prayer life. Let's talk about some of those missionaries. Brother Lanny Hasbrook's been home in heaven for a long, long time now. But we began many, many years ago praying for missionaries on a daily basis. One family in the church would have a missionary, another family would have another missionary, and we started that and said, let's do this. Let's make sure that we're bathing our missionaries in prayer on a daily basis. We hadn't been going less than a week, and I got a call from Brother Lanny Hasbrook, who was an evangelist at that time. Very dear friend. He's home with the Lord now. But it was kind of a broken voice. He said, preacher, I just got a call from a family in your church. And he said they've been praying for Karen and I this week every day. And he said, I wanted to call and tell you. He said, we just hit a patch of ice and rolled our van over 4 times. And nobody's hurt. And he said, thank you. Because somebody was praying. Can I help you tonight? Missions is not, let's get together for a few nights, let's look at the maps, let's get the pictures and see the slides, and let's put some money in the pan. Yeah, it is all of that, but it's more. Yes. It's redeeming the time. The days are evil. It may not be evil today in your life. You may not have a September 11th in your 11th in your day today, but some missionary may halfway around the world. Or you may not have a golden opportunity today, but some missionary halfway around the world could. Redeeming the time, buying it back, paying for it, making sure that it's going on. I heard Oswald J. Smith, I believe, one time say that everybody is fixated on the second coming. And we're all talking about the second coming. We're all studying the scriptures about the second coming. And he said over half the world has never heard of the first coming. What kind of people are we? We were put here to let them know about the first coming. And now we're fixated on our, not His return, but our leaving. Somewhere along the way, missions has got to become serious to the heart of the believer. May I ask you, do you remember how you heard for the first time about the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ? You remember the first person that told you? I remember Brother Brockseeker's funeral several years ago, and I think there were 10 or 12 men that over the course of that week said, he talked to me. It's the first one that mentioned the gospel to me. I thought about that for days and weeks. I thought everybody dies, but I've never heard anybody say that about somebody else that had died. Thanking God for somebody that told me that I needed to be saved and willing to endure what I would have thrown back in their face at that time. But he witnessed to me, and as a result, I'm saved. My family's saved. We're in church. You say, what was that? That's just an old guy redeeming the time. Redeeming the time because the days are evil. Can I ask you something? What have you done the last week to redeem the time? What have you done in your lifetime to redeem the time? Young people, it's easy to fixate on what's ahead. Got my future. Got college, got this, got marriage, got all this stuff. Boy, it's going to be an exciting life. It's going to be wonderful. And I hope and pray that it is. But I want you to know when you get out here 25 or 30 years and it's all been exciting, can I tell you what's going to concern you? What did I do with all this time? Is there anything of value in the life that I've... Yes, I'm thankful for my husband or my wife and my kids, and I'm thankful for the blessings of God. And all, but how did I redeem that time? It's easy to let time pass you by. May I submit to you tonight that the mark of a great church is not and never has been its seating capacity. The mark of a great church is its sending capacity. To get the gospel around the world. To see that others hear the wonderful story that changed your life. That changed my life. That altered all there was. Think about the dire nature of the need. This is not a need for surgery. This is not a need for a life flight. This is not a need for some counseling and altering a lifestyle. This is a need for something to keep them out of a lake of fire that is for eternity. If someone tonight dropped in the foyer with a heart attack, we'd gather around. We'd immediately, without being told, some people would be dialing the ambulance. Some people would be going to make sure that we had something that's cold we could put on. Everyone would go into action. What you say, why? We don't have much time. We've got to get busy quickly. And yet, for some, this is your 15th missions conference. And you put some money in the pan. That's really great. We support a lot of missionaries right here. Well, yeah, I think this guy was in our church 10 years ago. Are we really redeeming that? If that was the response on 9/11, how many more people would have died? How many more would have perished if those first responders had just lived like normal Christians? Several of those accounts were firefighters that called their families on the way into the building and said, I don't think I'll make it out. but I got to go in. Do we have that kind of ideology about our missions, giving and praying and going and sending? Or is it just, we got 9 things around our church and, this is missions, and so we'll just focus on that. What have you ever done to redeem the time? To buy it back, to pay it back, to somehow. There was a missionary by the name of Oswald Gilter who had been a missionary in China years ago, back around the turn of the end of the 19th century. And as he came back, he stopped in New Delhi for the ship to refuel. And as he was there, he found a warehouse there on the dock. And in that area were hundreds of people who were refugees that had come from various places and had nowhere to live. And he began to talk to them and said, it's December the 23rd, I believe was the day. He said, Christmas is just around the corner. He said, I wanted to talk to them about something that they didn't know anything about. And they said, well, what is Christmas? He said, Christmas is when we could commemorate the birth of God's Son, Jesus Christ, who came into the world to bring a gift of eternal life. And they said, well, that's not our religion, and that's not our religion. We've never learned that. We're not interested, and all of that. And he said, well, what would you like for Christmas? Because in our country, it's customary to give away gifts. If you had that holiday, what would you want? And almost in unison, they said, there's a bakery down the road here, and they bake fresh sweet bread every day, and we can smell it, but we don't have. He went back to the boat, cashed in his ticket, went down to the bakery, and brought all of those people in that warehouse bread. When he got home, he was telling his friend about that. And his friend said, you cashed in your ticket? He said, yeah. He said, you bought bread for all those, and none of them were Christians? He said, no, they'd never heard the story of Jesus. And I got a chance to give it to them, but their language was so diverse and different. There weren't any type of professions. And they said, well, why in the world would you do that? They weren't even Christians. And he looked and he smiled. He said, yes, but I am. Redeeming the time because the days are evil. I'll bet every one of us has somewhere in our past, whether you're 65, 70, or 20, you could right now close your eyes and think just for a few seconds and remember somewhere in your life where somebody was just incredibly nice to you. May not have been in the context of the gospel or the Bible, but somebody was just very nice to you. We never forgot it. Did you ever wonder whether we even take our witnessing seriously? Here, let me give you a gospel tract. If you do that, you won't go to hell. Fry like a sausage. God told me to pass this out to wicked people. You look like the most wicked person I've seen today. That's kind of the approach, isn't it? It's kind of the approach. And as a result, we're wasting time. But the Bible said to redeem the time. Make it worthwhile. Make it pay. Make it something you look back and cherish in the course of your lifetime. Back in the days of the gangsters, Al Capone had a fellow that ran a dog track down in Florida for him. You've been there to Brother Carter's. That tall hotel in the middle of the town was where Al Capone stayed when he made his journey from Chicago going to Miami every year. That's why they wouldn't let him tear it down. They made it a historic. Brother Carter was in charge of that, I think, but he let him know the story. But he had a guy down there, and this guy, Artful Eddie, was a guy that ran the dog track, and of course it was all involved in organized crime. But Artful Eddie was kind of artful himself. Because in the process, he realized that he could take 7 dogs that were going to run in the race, and the day before the race, he would feed 6 of them everything they could eat. And they ate, and they ate, and they ate, and then the day of the race, he bet on the 7th dog. And it always won. Fat dogs can't run, evidently. But he amassed a small fortune. And then he had a son born. And his lifestyle began to bother him. bugged him. That he had lived the life he had lived, and that he had put such grief upon his wife and would never be the individual that his son needed to emulate in a father. And as a result of that, he went to the police and turned himself in. Word got back to Chicago to Al Capone, and Al Capone had him assassinated or executed. End of story. But that little boy, who as he grew had just faded memories of his father, remembering his father tell him, don't grow up to be like me. Make something of yourself. Be something that your mother and your wife and family could be proud of. The fellow grew up and went to school, graduated from college, a little place called Annapolis, Maryland. Became a naval aviator and was a decorated World War II hero. To such an extent that in Chicago, where Al Capone's hierarchy was, they decided to honor this young man. And they took the place that was most recognizable, they believed, in Chicago, and they named it O'Hare Airport. Most people have no idea when they fly in and out of O'Hare that it's named after a gangster. But it's named after a gangster who one day said, wait a minute, my life is a waste. My life doesn't have any meaning to it at all. And he redeemed the time. May I ask you tonight, is it possible that this week, these few days, God might work in your heart and your life in such a way as to maybe push the envelope in some capacity? I'm not asking for money tonight. It might be prayer. Maybe you're somebody that could easily kneel beside your bed and spend an hour in prayer for one of these missionaries. And God would hear your prayer and answer that prayer halfway around the world. Are you willing to say, I want to redeem the time? Think about all the missions conferences that most of us have been in. And look around us today at the condition our nation is in. Look at the dire need around the world. Double the population when I was a boy. Someone said if you lined every unsaved person up in the world, just single file, and this is dated, they said that would form a line that would circle the globe 9 times. And every day that line would increase 9 miles. How in the world are we ever going to reach? He said, go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. How are you doing with that? You got your 7 billion? Anybody there yet? We got the award tonight. Who's reached their 7 billionth person? I can't do that alone. Boy, I am glad there's somebody in China. I am glad there are people that are going around the world to carry the gospel where I can't be. And I want to help them redeem the time. I don't want them to have to spend 5 years trying to raise support. I don't want them to have to deal with all. I want to help them get to where they're going so they can preach the gospel so people will get saved. And someday when I stand before the Lord, as I'm sure most of us will, and you say, Lord, I was just a shameful thing. I never accomplished much. Well, I'm sure hoping God will take one of these missionaries and call them over and say, you know, you put some money and help this guy, and you prayed for an hour a couple times a week for this guy here. You wrote a letter to this guy here, and boy, you know, I just want you to know you won quite a few people to Christ just by redeeming the time. I traveled to the mission field in my younger days a little bit more than I can now, but I learned from a fellow by the name of Jim White. He's been gone with the Lord a long time now. He was, without a doubt, the funniest man who ever walked on the face of the earth, just naturally. I think we would call him a doofus now, because anything stupid, it would happen to Jim White. He always had stories. But he loved missions. And he'd travel to missionaries and encourage them and be there with them. And I learned from him, and when I made my mission trips, I remember taking a part of my suitcase or sometimes an extra suitcase and just filling it up with whatever I thought they would like to have. I remember taking baseball cards to Athens, Greece, and watching 3 teenage boys fight over baseball cards. And they were so happy that a preacher came to visit them. Now, let me translate that for you. They were really happy to get the baseball cards. But they never forgot. And when those boys grew to adulthood and came back to America to try and build a life here, they all 3 came through the doors of Hope Baptist Church and spent a time there to acclimate to America before they went out and found a wife and got married and had their own career. I'm thankful that we were able to do a little time redeeming somewhere around the world. What have you done for missions in the last year? You've given. That's great. I'm thankful for that, and I know missionaries are. You say, well, we've really sacrificed, and that's wonderful, and that's great, but can't you hear the siren screaming? Can't you see the lights flashing? Every time you turn on a news broadcast, it's some country you've never heard of, and people are dying. It's some place nobody's ever been, and there's an outbreak, and people are all ill, and they're dying. It's war, it's poverty, it's whatever it might be. They're dying all around the world, and we can turn the TV off and say, boy, thank God it's not that way in my life. But God said, you need to redeem the time. Somebody's perishing tonight. And it's an amazing thing how every once in a while it comes close enough to home to sober us up a little bit. I pastored for 40 years. It was not often, but boy, it was always a chilling thing when somebody came and said so-and-so died. And I had a chance to witness to them, and I didn't. And it troubled them. Can I tell you, when they brought that to my attention, they'd have given everything they owned to go back in time and have one more chance to reach that friend or that neighbor with the gospel. But those days are gone. That time cannot be redeemed. But you and I have the opportunity this week, all the way around the world, to get alarmed about the need, to hear the wail and the crying of those halfway around the world, and to say, let's help get this missionary, this firefighter, this police officer, this emergency, let's get this emergency technician halfway around the world to get the gospel to those people. Rescue the perishing. Before we finish this sermon in a minute or two, many, many people will have perished around the world. Let's get involved this week, would you? Let's pray. Can I challenge you this week to somewhere in a quiet moment, take some time and say, God, I'm kind of like the Ephesians, boy. I came from wherever it might be, but you've rescued my life. You've changed my life. Lord, I was in church for a missions conference last night. I would never have done that years ago. I'm in church on a Sunday morning now. I'm faithfully, and Lord, you've changed my life. Thank you for that. But God, help me to redeem some of those days. Way back here where I didn't know. I was a lost hellion. I didn't care about the things of God. And Lord, you saved Paul when he was just like me. That's the way we were. And he spent the rest of his life redeeming the time. God, help me to redeem the time that I have left by reaching those I knew, those I know now, those around me, those halfway around the world. Help me just to become a fanatic at reaching people with the gospel. Would you bow your heads tonight just for a moment? That's what a missions conference is about. We can get up and tell you happy stories and sad stories, and those are all good. And you can walk out and you can have a story that, boy, 6 months from now, you can sit down and tell somebody, boy, I heard this missionary tell this story. And you can recount it. But I want to ask you tonight, not will you remember the stories, but will you be able to say there was a time in the course of this missions meeting when I knelt and said, God, help me to redeem some time. Some of you seniors here tonight, there was a day when you promised God some things you never fulfilled. And now the days have come and gone. The gray hairs outnumber the ones that are not gray. You don't move quite as fast as you once, and now I guess you're just never going to be able to. Really? Maybe it's time to redeem the days. To say, God, I promised you this such a long time ago, and I don't know how, but by the grace of God, help me to redeem the days. Help me to fulfill my calling, my promise. Help me, Lord, not just to know some missionary stories, but help me to be able to say, I have, by the best of my ability and by the grace of God, tried to make a difference in redeeming the time because there's so little of it around the world. Preacher.